Okay. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Douglas. Thank you for inviting me onto your show.
Well, thank you for coming on. Pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, I always enjoy talking about my books. Sorry.
That's okay. So, where are you from? I detect an English accent.
Yeah, I'm currently living in Wales. My husband's Welsh. I am English. I was born in the Midlands in Worcestershire, spent a number of years in Shropshire in a very rural pub, which features in some of my folk horror novels. Travelled down to Southampton after a few years in Wales, and now we're back in Wales in Wrexham, which has been making the news lately for various reasons about their football club.
I thought maybe the was making news because of the death of the Queen or Prince William or one of those. Wasn't there some kind of debate whether he should actually be called Prince of Wales? Is there something going on with that?
Of that, there wasn't so much a debate about whether he should be Prince of Wales, although there is that aspect to some people in Wales. It's the whole investiture business because when Prince Charles was became Prince of Wales, he had a whole big ceremony in I think it was Carnarvon Castle, and they were talking about whether Prince William should go through that. This time, but they've said no. He's just taken the title and is carrying on quietly in the role without the ceremony. From what I can gather, Prince Charles is very much for slimming down the monarchy and reducing the amount of ceremonial, which I think is probably for the best, especially when times are so hard over here. I don't know whether you've heard about our budget recently, but everybody's being taxed. Money's running out. The lights will be going out in winter. It's all doom.
Doom and gloom. Yeah, I have been kind of watching that. Well, it's not a lot better in the United States either. So I think we're going to have some hard economic times around the world for a while.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I hope they settle down. I think the people I feel really sorry for are those over in Ukraine at the moment. I mean, we think we've got it hard. Yes, we do have a bit of hardship, but I remember when rates were really high and we were buying our house and we got through it. I grew up in the 70s with power cuts and reading by candlelight and things like that. And you get through it, you survive, but bombs and guns and that sort of thing, that's on a different scale altogether. So I think ultimately we just count our blessings a bit.
well, I agree with you. Well, I'm glad that at least they gave the Queen a great send off because I'm glad you were talking about cutting down on the ceremony and things, but that was an amazing thing for us to watch. Because even if a president dies in the United States, they don't have that kind of ceremony for
Yeah.
the
I
president's
I
funeral.
hope we don't I hope we don't lose it, or I know that they'll slim it down and you have got to be sensitive to the times. But part of what draws people to the country is the history of the country. And when you recreate ceremonies and traditions that have been around for so long, it gives that country a little bit of a pull for other people. They'll come over and they enjoy seeing it all, whether it's a funeral, a christening, or a wedding. I mean, a death is very sad. I mean, she was here all my. I don't know any different. I don't think my parents know any different. But it's one of those things. But I do enjoy the pomp and the pageantry a bit because I do like history.
Right, and it just showed a certain continuity between the people in Britain where you can have arguments and fights about politics, but she was sort of the glue that held everyone together.
Yeah, I think the monarchy is a balance. I'm not as much of a monarchist as I used to be, but I do want a monarchy because I don't with the Republican you just get these presidents and you think, oh, you'd be stuck with them forever or they'll be around, but there's nobody to sort of check them a bit. You see Putin over in Russia and he keeps switching between prime minister and president, and you never know what's going to happen. And I think that's a worry for other countries. But a monarchy with certain restrictions is a good balance.
Okay, so you are a writer. Have you been a writer your whole life?
No, no, not
No?
really. I was very much a reader, an early reader, and I loved to read. I would read anything and everything. I can remember a time when I was in this pub that I was talking about in Shropshire. It's called the Cider House, middle of nowhere, no villages or anything for a few miles. Nearest neighbour was down the road. And when the pub was open, if we weren't out riding, I was reading. And I used to read so much that my mum would take my books away from me and send me outside for a bit. So I've always been a reader, but I don't know, about 10 years, no, it'd be 15 years. Time flies so much when you get older. But sort of 15 years ago, I started to write a little bit because I was reading the books that I read to my kids. And I'd got a part-time job in a school library and I was reading things there. And I was thinking, I can write these, I can write something like this, not necessarily for children, but writing stories. And that's where I started. So I'm very much an older writer. I mean, I'm 58 now. I've been getting published for several years, but I would say it is something of a bit of a hobby horse of mine. So any writer who is older, just go for it. Don't worry that it's a young person's game. It's not. Get your face out there, wrinkles and all. It doesn't matter. Just write what you want to write and keep going. You can be 50, 60, 70, 80, even 90. I think there was a local writer on the news recently in their 90s. But, just write when you can. I think for a lot of women, they're so tied up with family. I know I was, that when you've got a young family and then you're working as well, there is very little time left for yourself. But as my kids got older, I started to write in those gaps. And now that they are young adults, although they're still at home at the moment, I can put myself first for a change, and they can actually cook the dinner and do a bit of the housework.
So how many books have you published at this point?
I've had 2 novels published. There's The Five Turns of the Wheel and its sequel, Reborn. They're both folk horror. I've got another novel, The Woodcutter, that's due out next summer. I've got 2 novellas, Bottled, which is a gothic horror, and Paused, which is a sort of bio thriller type book. I've got some collections of poetry. There's Foundlings, which is found poetry, which I've written with Cindy O'Quinn, and that's based on the dark poetry of Linda D. Addison and Alessandro Manzetti, and they are both brilliant poets if anybody wants to pick up some dark poetry. I've also written Lilith Rising with Shane Douglas Keane, and that's a novella, a horror novella in verse form. And then I've also done a bit of a labour of love, a collection of found poetry, Metallurgy, which is based on the lyrics of 200 of my favourite heavy metal tracks. So it was sort of 2 lyrics to 1 poem, because I do love heavy metal, whether it's industrial metal, death metal, bit of doom or goth, whatever. I really like it. So I thought I'd have a go at that, and I've published that myself. But the novels and the novellas, those have been published with Brigids Press, which is a really good little press. It's been out for about a year or so. And the couple who run it, it's their lifelong dream, and they're putting out some excellent work, and they've given my books a home as well. So check them out.
All right. Are you a Black Sabbath fan?
I like Black Sabbath. I would say Nine Inch Nails, Rammstein, but I will say a sort of claim to fame. At my parents' second pub, the Wine Vaults in Church Stretton, I remember being upstairs one day and my mum came running upstairs and she was going, Stevie, Stevie, because my mum and dad always call me Stevie. There's a bloke downstairs, Ozzy Osbourne. Am I supposed to know who he is? And it was him, because one of his ex-roadies worked on the market in our little village and he'd come over.
Wow.
So that made me laugh. I didn't get to see him, but there you go.
Well, there you go. You mentioned something called folk horror. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, there's a genre I've never heard of. What is that?
Have you ever seen The Wicker Man?
The Wicker Man, yes. The one where they put
Yeah.
the guy in and set him on fire. Yeah.
Wicker Man, Blood on Satan's Claw, that sort of thing. That is folk horror, where you've got a story. It's usually set in a rural environment. It doesn't have to be rural. There is some urban folk horror coming out, but it treats on traditions, a stranger coming into an isolated area, and the things that happen then. It's my sort of folk horror is based very much on the rural. It's English traditions are in there. Some I've made up because I don't think that you can spend your time burning everybody. I try to think of new sorts of forms of torture, but it's dealing with traditions in a rural setting, and usually a diabolic sort of an inversion of what people think of as the pastoral idyll. You go out to the countryside and you think it's perfect, but that it's not what it looks like. There's usually a devil or the fiends in the furrows lurking beneath the soil to trip up the unwary.
Does it have to have a pagan element to it?
Not necessarily, but mine do. Most do, because it is like a stretching back to an older time to bring in sort of past traditions. With 5 turns of the wheel, I created a lot of my own traditions and rituals within that, although I did use some sort of existing traditional elements, like the rapper dance. There's a dance where you hold these, it's a sword with 2 wooden handles either end, and people are dancing and weaving in and out of each other, and you can see what would happen if a blade caught you. So I've used the traditional rapper dance, but in the Reborn, which is a follow-up, I've looked into various Celtic myths and even Viking sort of rituals and brought those in to a certain degree as well. But it is very, very paganistic in a way.
Okay. And so Reborn is the latest book, is that correct? Is this?
Yes, it is. It's the follow-up to the 5 turns, but I will say that I've written it in such a way that you don't need to have read the first one to understand what's going on in the second one. The first one was very much a reaction by the women in an isolated village against the beings. They're in this other world that's very nearby. They're sort of human, but not quite. But they control this little area of England called the Weald. And it's through rituals of blood sacrifice that these beings exist. But they became too cruel, and Mother Nature put a stop to it. And she put one of these characters, their daughter, in charge. And this woman, Megan, she stopped them. But in Reborn, the people who she stopped surviving, the Umbrans, who are these other people, they're getting weak because they're losing blood. They can't feed on blood, they can't feed on flesh, and they're getting annoyed. So they go on this quest to find other family members and to make amends to the Mother Nature, and their father, who is rising from the deeps, and to start the rituals again. And then Megan, who stopped it, she's going along at the same time on a sort of parallel quest to restore her husband to life and to stop these others regaining their power. Whether she does that or not, you have to sort of wait and see. But it is very much a power struggle. But a lot of it is, as I started to think about it, it's very much about how women are sort of kept in their place by males in society over time. And usually because it's due to their ability just to give birth. It's linked to that. Women were only thought of as being valuable because they created the next generation, and so you do that, but then you're treated really badly. But people control their bodies, so this was very much about the women trying to regain that control and get some balance.
Last question, and then we got to wind this down. How many books do you anticipate are going to be in this series?
Well, I've written 2. I've written a collection of short stories written in the same world, so you explore other villages in the world, called As the Wheel Turns, More Tales from the Weald. And I'm going to write another one because I want to see what's going to happen. I mean, there was quite a definite end to Reborn. The loose ends that were left from 5 turns are tied up, but it's allowed more to happen in a third. So I will carry on for at least a third. But if I can, I would like a few more than that, because you spend your time as a writer creating a world and you grow to love your characters and you want to see what they'll get up to next. When I was writing 5 turns, I was really enjoying the writing process, and I was just heading towards the end. I never outline, I never plot, and I suddenly saw what was going to happen to them. And I thought, no, that can't happen, because otherwise I won't get any more books. So I had to change the ending from what it was going to be, just so that I could carry on writing about them, because I love writing about the monsters in my stories so much that it's just good fun.
Well, Stephanie, we got to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Yes, I do. It's www.stephanieellis.org. And thank you for having me, by the way. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, great. Well, best of luck with your book series. And I was going to say have a great Thanksgiving, but that's an American holiday. So you guys don't do that one over there.
No, we don't. No. I've got a lot of people always wish me happy holidays and happy Thanksgiving. And I've just got used to saying thank you. You know, I'll enjoy it as well.
Okay, Stephanie, take care.